Hi, my lovelies. I tried recording for a good hour outside and I just messed up in terms of I didn't realize that the darkness was setting in, like the sun was setting, and I started looking really dark at some point, like my face um, couldn't be seen properly. Anyhow, um, that didn't work out. I have like a bunch of videos that I took outside because I thought I'd look aesthetic in the wind and everything, but that didn't work out. So here I am sitting inside my room. um, I jump right into what I've been thinking about lately. But before, I'd like to say this channel is like a really safe space. I hope to make it a safe space to really let out all our thoughts and ideas because I think every idea needs to be heard, every thought needs to be heard. Whether it's valid or not, that's a different thing. But, this is, or I hope to make this an organic place to really let out any sort of an opinion or any sort of a thought process that we may have in terms of whatever that the topic of discussion is. And I think today I really wanted to focus on relationships. And there's something that has been on my mind for quite a bit of a while, and that is change, right? How do you deal with change? And I think change in terms of how a partner changes in a relationship, right? This came across as an idea because I think somebody I know came to me and told me, listen, I've been having a really tough time with my marriage because the man I loved, the man that I fell in love with, is no longer the same. And I said, in what sense do you mean that? And she told me, well, I fell in love with a man who was really soft and gentle. And anytime I used to be angry or I used to get mad, he would listen. He wouldn't say anything. And he'd come back and, try to make things right. And he'd, try to basically sort of make me understand, say sorry, even if it wasn't his fault. There was no ego that he ever showed. But now he's so egoistic. He has to pick a fight about everything. He rarely wants to admit his mistakes, even when he's actually in the wrong. He's irritable. He really loses his temper very easily. And then I asked her, well, how long has it been? She said 20 years. And that's when, I kind of told her, well, 20 years, you're not going to find the same person at the end of the day. Because 20 years is a long time. We change, I would say, within 1 or 2 years. So just imagine 20 years worth of life experiences that is actually changing someone. While that was, of course, my primary thought process, I also really thought about it like, yeah, what if people do really change? What if the man I fell in love with is no longer the same? How am I going to deal with it? Do I fall out of love? Do I start resenting this person for not being the same? Do I blame them? And that felt kind of scary because it is real. Change is real. And people are going to change. No one's going to stay the same. I think the core tenets of who we are remains the same. And I think that is something that I'll touch upon later. But yeah, people will change. Every 2 years, every 3 years, life experiences will change us. For the good, for the worse, in terms of our temperament or in terms of qualities that we possess. There's death, there's loss, there's success, new friendships, new situations, kids. I think there's so many factors that can really change and alter human beings. But then the more I thought about it, the more I didn't know how to deal with this change, until I came across this very wonderful article. Not exactly an article, but rather an excerpt from a book, which is called "Stop Letting Everything Affect You" by Daniel Kidiak. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Sorry. Pardon me if I'm butchering his name. But anyway, so the excerpt this is how it goes. My grandparents were married for 60 years. One day I asked my grandfather, "What's the secret to loving the same woman for a lifetime?" He didn't laugh. He didn't say communication. He didn't say date nights. He looked at my grandmother, who was in the kitchen, and said, "You don't love the same woman." That confused me. He said, "She changes every few years. And if you don't update the way you love her, you lose her." He told me that the girl he married at 22 wasn't the same woman at 30. Motherhood changed her. Loss changed her. Time changed her. At 40, he said she needed respect more than romance. At 50, she needed partnership more than passion. At 60, she needed presence more than promises. And every time she changed, he had a choice. Complain that she's not like she used to be, or learn her again. He said the biggest mistake men make is this. They fall in love once, then stop paying attention. Loving a woman for a lifetime, he told me, is deciding to stay curious about her. Not assuming you know her, not freezing her in the version you met. He leaned back and said something I'll never forget. If you stop studying her, someone else eventually will. 60 years. Not because it was easy, because he kept relearning her. Now, I think those are some of the most beautiful words I've heard in a while. Not because they're ornamental, but the gravity of each word, right? Relearning her. I think that really struck a chord within me. And it's not just about, it's not from a single gender's point of view. I think it goes both ways. Relearning her, relearning him, vice versa. But essentially, it's about really staying curious about your partner, because I think relationships, partnerships are probably the most intimate form of any relation that you will ever have, because not intimacy in, of course, the physical sense, but intimacy in terms of you have someone who is a witness to your life. And I think this is also a concept that I would have picked up from somewhere. Somebody who's witnessing your entire life, somebody who comes back home, has dinner with you every single day, somebody who's watching your mood swings every single second, every single minute, somebody who's there with you when you've lost a parent, somebody's there with you when you've had your biggest promotion ever, somebody who's witnessing life with you as and when you grow old. I mean, I think it's beautiful. And when you have this sort of relationship and setup, right, with someone who you choose to marry and spend your life with, you've got to be curious about them, because if you don't, I think that's a very unfair thing that you're doing. If you are freezing someone in one particular version of them at 22. At 22, somebody's obviously going to be very different from what they are going to be at 42. There's 20 years worth of life that is going to happen in the middle. And this person is going to transform and change. Yes, there are going to be changes that are going to be good. This person is going to be a lot more mature, a lot more aware, would have developed a lot of personality traits and qualities that are really wise. However, there will be changes that may not be the most optimum. This person might have become more irritable, and it's not just experiences, it's also age. People do become more irritable, short tempered with age. I mean, it's just one sort of a negative change that I'm talking about. There could be other forms of changes. The person may not be as romantic as well because, well, you are a certain person at 22. You see the world in a different way. You have a different expectation from a lot of things. You're obviously a lot more gullible. You may be a lot more optimistic also at such a young age. However, at 40, life has happened to you. I'm just taking a certain age here. It's not particularly 20 to 40, but by 40, you've experienced a lot. You've seen life. Life may have remolded you. You may have had experiences that would have made you realize, oh God, like I think I was so naive back then. That's bound to happen, and that may impact your disposition as well, your general disposition. Let's say you were a very cheerful person. You may be a more somber person at 40, right? So if that's when your partner comes and tells you, I hate you for being so somber. What happened to the happy, easygoing you? I think that's a big accusation that you make at your partner, and I think in that moment, your partner feels hurt because somewhere he or she is thinking, why isn't she able to see me? Why? Because she's the witness to my life. She or he's the witness to my life. She has to be the one who's seeing me, who's hearing me. So I think it's also a little hurtful, when you make such allegations and accusations. But I think I was digressing, and the key is to be curious, because just think about it. And I might sound a bit romantic, and I might sound like I'm romanticizing change, but you get to learn every version of your partner. You get a chance to unlearn how you love them and relearn them in a completely different way. And this change occurs in two ways. One, you are getting the chance to relearn and unlearn someone who is changing in front of your eyes over the due course of years. And you are also learning them with a different version of yourself. So I think it's the change is dual, right? Obviously, because it's not just your partner who's changing, you are also changing, right, simultaneously. And you are getting, again, I'm repeating what I said previously, you are not only learning a new person, a new you is also learning a new partner that you have, or a new version of your partner. So both of you guys are changing. And sometimes there are going to be times where I'm sure the change is not in accordance to each other. I think your partner might be growing in a certain way based on their life experience. I think you might be going through a different life experience, and you might be changing in a certain way. And yes, maybe the change is not always cohesive. Maybe there will be certain elements or certain periods in your life where you feel like, I don't know if he really gets me, or I don't know if he really understands me, or I don't think we're growing in the same ways. But that's the beauty of it. You don't have to always grow in the same ways. I think it's important to have that curiosity about your partner, really talk about it, really communicate about it. But hey, if I just had to give you an instance, right? Hey, I've been noticing this about you lately. You seem a little upset about these things lately. Like whenever I mention this, you seem to be really losing your cool. Is something up with you? And I think in those moments when you really bring up these observations, right, your partner really, well, no matter what the observation is, whether it's something positive, whether it's something negative, your partner really feels very heard and very seen. Like, wow, she's been noticing me, and he or she would really feel touched. They would feel extremely touched that she noticed that. Okay, no matter what it is, good or bad. So I think that curiosity, when you view your partner from that lens, and when you choose to stay hungry and curious about them, I think any type of change is something that you both can deal with in a very different way. And I think that process of unlearning and relearning is also so wonderful, because there's so many nuances to it, and so many layers to it. And maybe I seem a bit too optimistic or a bit too romantic about it, but I think it all works out in the end, because the core tenet of that person is still the same. You still know that this is the man who would stand up for this, that this is the man who would protect me, or this is a man who would stay true to those core values of whatever makes him. And if I had to give you an example of core values, I would say, let's just take something very simple like kindness, right? So I believe things that are a part of our core values are so embedded in who we are. And I think that starts from a really young age, right? It starts from your parents, to what you consume, to your peers, and to how that really changes you and shapes you into young adulthood or in your early 20s or whatever. And then you apply those values, and it reinforces, like every outcome. Every time you apply that value that you have, you get a certain outcome, and it reinforces that feeling of, this is something that is really crucial to me. This is crucial to who I am, because in most of the situations that I've been this way, that I've behaved this way, it's really solidified my understanding of who I am, and I really want to stick by this value. And I think the more life happens, the more that value solidifies within you. Let's say kindness. Inherently, I've witnessed my parents being really kind to a lot of people, not just to themselves, but to a lot of people around them. I watched a lot of Disney movies. um, so it made me view the world in a different way as a kid, and I chose to imbibe certain values. Of course, there's also your own inherent nature. I think that also plays a role. But I think nature versus nurture, that's a different debate. But essentially, because of both a combination of nature and nurture, you, in your early adulthood, you realize that, okay, these are certain values. This is a certain part of me. Okay, like it's not something that I have to force on myself. It very naturally comes out. And I think that's when that is the phase where you're kind of understanding yourself and who you really are and how you react to certain situations. And that becomes your nature, right? So then again, kindness is something that really comes out of you because of, again, how you've been raised or whatever, all the different factors of your early childhood. Now you realize that, okay, essentially I'm a kind person because I don't even have to try, like it just comes out. So that is what I mean by nature. Honesty is one more example. I'm just a very honest person in general, because of, again, life experiences, nature versus nurture, whatever the debate is. I am in general a very honest person, and I have applied honesty in most situations in my life, and I've realized that this is something that works out for me, and this is something I want to live by because it's the best policy. Honesty is the best policy. Sorry, I just thought of second grade values that they teach us. That's besides the point. What I was trying to say is, nature is hard to change, right? And I think as a partner, one should feel really disturbed when the inherent nature of a person changes. I think that is something that is really serious, and that is something that should scare one. For example, if my partner used to be really attentive to who I am, to the things I used to say, and now suddenly my partner doesn't care, appears to completely ignore me in most situations, is not attentive at all, not because they're busy, but just in general, they've ceased to pay attention to anything that you do. I think that is like a big change, right? You see, and it is a very scary change because essentially they seem like they don't care about you. Now, I think that is a very, very, very different form of change. And I think that is something that you should immediately address and be like, hey, this is really what's going on, and really talk about it and fight for that, because that is something that you should be fighting for, because it's a scary change. Essentially, it almost feels like your partner doesn't love you, right? Because love is about noticing a lot of small things about your spouse, your partner, and caring, caring about your partner, caring about the small things. I think that is really important. So when you see that dissonance, or when you see that indifference, that is very scary. Seeing that in a marriage is very scary. So that is something that should scare you. That is something that should be a big factor. But other changes, like, obviously your partner still loves you, still cares about you, but life made your partner a different way. I think those are the changes that we should really try to understand and grow with, rather than complaining and saying that, you are not like you were at 20. Of course he's not like he was in 20, because he was 20. He's barely seen life. He's barely been through any life circumstances. He is going to be a lot more optimistic about life. Maybe life happened to him. Maybe really bad things happened to him. I don't know, maybe in the corporate space, maybe in the personal space, and that really bogged him down, and maybe he's more somber. Now, you can't blame him for that, can you? But you can learn to re-love him in a different way, or learn to re-love her in a different way. I think we've got to be clear about the changes, first of all. Although I seem very romantic, there are changes that are really scary and should really be addressed, and I think are real fighting points in a relationship. Whereas I think most of the other changes that are more towards the exterior aspects of a person, not the inherent qualities, not their unwavering love for you, but rather their temperament, their nature, other things, the more things that make up their personality, right? I think if that changes, I think we've got to learn and grow. And I think like I mentioned, I think there are a lot of beautiful ways to learn and grow, right? Because you're also learning and growing, they're also learning and growing. And it's just this very wholesome and lovely process of noticing each other and really learning to love each other in completely different ways. Whereas I think the scarier aspects of change, where you realize indifference, where you realize, I think indifference is really scary in a marriage. I keep mentioning indifference because I think when you see the person being indifferent is when you're like, oh my God, So I mean, there are huge deal breakers as well in relationships that should not be ignored, and should not be changes that people just somehow learn to deal with. But I hope I could make some sense, because not everything always makes sense. Even when I think about these ideas and thoughts, it's always like 50% clarity and 50% I gotta maybe read some more, maybe think some more. But I don't know. I think this passage that I read really, really cleared up a lot of things for me. Really gave me a whole new perspective, a whole new, fresh perspective. And I hope it made sense to you guys. I hope it kind of made things a little more clearer in your head when it comes to dealing with change in long-term relationships and partnerships. But yeah, please feel free to give me all your thoughts in the comment section, because I would love to know all of your takes on it. But yeah, I think that was the video for today. I don't know if I missed something crucial when it came to this topic. Please do drop in something in the comments if you feel like. And if you like my channel, please do subscribe for more wholesome, random concepts. I don't really stick to something. I don't get too political as well. I think I just discuss a lot of general life philosophy, relationships, society, culture. It's very generic, it's very random, and it's very raw, right? And it's very wholesome, because there's no extensive research as such. Of course, I read about different things and I formulate different ideas, but it's my organic thoughts combined with certain things that I consume online, on social media, in the news, and that I want to just have a very light discussion about. And yeah, see you guys in the next one.